The only podcast you can truly trust.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome back to the Fig Factor Weekly. I'm your host with the most, Harry Macy, and sat opposite me, the incredible, the intelligent, and the clinically blind Matt Maxted. How we doing, baby?
I fucking love your intros, Harry.
Give me your glasses. How bad are you?
No, they don't.
I've never seen you
They're
without
clear
them.
lenses.
No, these are fake. Is this how you got the job here? You're
Obviously.
like, I'm struggling to
Well,
get
you're
work.
telling my boss this now.
Struggling
So
to get a job in marketing, and then you put these on, and then
tell you what, you look much better looking without them glasses.
I thought you were about to put it as an air of mystery to it. How are you doing anyway, mate? You all good?
Yeah, we are wonderful.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you so much for coming in today. So, guys, it's a really interesting one today. It's a bit of a change of pace. So today we are looking at predominantly the difference between food and food supplement regulations and manufacturing from here in the UK, and that will apply to the majority of Europe as well, versus the US. Now, for those of you who don't know, I think, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I tend to look at it is UK and Europe, we're pretty strict, very heavily regulated. But the USA is the Wild West still, isn't it, baby?
Pretty much, yeah. From a philosophy point of view, the EU, you have to prove something is deemed as safe. You have to prove it to be safe to be taken, unless it's a novel food, which means if it was consumed for a health benefit before 1997, it is okay. If not, then you've got to go through a process of proving that this ingredient is safe for consumption. The US, completely different approach. They are the polar opposite, whereas food must be deemed unsafe.
Yeah.
So you go ahead and do it, and then if they start doing studies and people start getting ill, then they'll go and do it. So that leads to a completely different world of ingredients that are used.
Yeah, and that's a great summary. That's kind of what I've taken away from everything that we've been looking at this week and talking about is the UK, before a product can make it to market, they're very cautious with substances. They want to do a lot of testing, a lot of practices, whereas the USA, they generally say, hey, let's just launch it and get it on the market. And then when people start dropping dead, or when they've got however many complaints, that's when they look to start pulling things. So I sort of like to think of it, it's a bit like the US judicial system. It's innocent until proven guilty, isn't it? They're like, until we know this ingredient or this product is going to kill someone, let's just get selling it, and then we'll deal with it later on. That's a pretty fair way of looking at it, isn't it?
Yeah. Then they use the term generally recognised as safe. Now, when you're taking foods, having something that's generally safe doesn't sound too appealing. But initially, it was meant for ingredients like vinegar or vegetable oil, which have long been considered safe, which we all know have been taken for thousands of years. It's all good. But as with any legislation and in a free market, people push the boundaries and break rules. There is estimated over 1,000 untested ingredients on the US market, which some of these will actually be incredibly beneficial that might not be allowed to be consumed in EU. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's going to be ones on there that are harmful.
Yeah, and I love, I want to dive into that a little bit more because it's GRAS, isn't it? GRAS. And that's the US and sort of USA and FDA's way of looking at these ingredients that we'll talk a bit more about in a minute. But yeah, generally recognised as safe, which sounds so like if someone was like, is this safe to take? And someone was like, and you were like, okay, that's kind of how it feels to me. They're like, look, generally it's recognised as safe, but until it's not. So they're kind of allowing these products to go. I suppose the beauty is it allows people to develop a product, to launch it, to go to market much quicker and much easier than it would here in UK, Europe, or we do quite a lot with sort of Middle East, UAE, and they've got really strict registration process over there, even though their rules are quite the same as ours. But the problem is, referring back to my sort of day-to-day working in the supplement industry, is we can easily take UK products across Europe. We can easily take them across the Middle East. We could easily take them across the USA, but the USA wouldn't want them because the dosages, the ingredients, it's so much more limited. And vice versa, when we get US clients looking to launch here in the UK, well, realistically, the product needs sort of rebuilding from scratch because there are so many components, ingredients, and we'll talk about that a bit more. I think now would be a really good idea about where the key differences come in. So realistically, the big differences are dosages, the use of certain ingredients. There's a lot that's sort of banned or restricted here or considered pharmaceutical, where the US will just let it fly. But the biggest ones, it's more in preservatives, additives, and colourings in particular, all really big hitters for the US, right, Matt?
Yeah, and I think there's one thing that people often overlook is in the US, they have government subsidies if they use US ingredients. And now these subsidies will help, in the way the world markets are at the moment, you need every bit of help you can get. So if you're using US ingredients, you're getting these subsidies, of course you're going to do it. So there's only a finite amount of natural ingredients. Some of these, I think rhodiola rosea, it's only grown in certain countries, definitely not grown in America. It's difficult to actually get those US ingredients in. But colourings, artificial stuff, that's all made in a lab.
They live for it. Yeah. No shortage of that over in the States,
exactly.
Is
So you can put your product full of them, get more money from the government, helps with your margins, and most of these actually make the product taste better. Doesn't necessarily mean it is better for you, but if you're getting consumers addicted to your product, then, and you're getting paid for it, why not?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. So I think to kick us off on a perfect example of this, I had a wonderful colleague, and he went out of his way to get himself some pre-workout from the USA. Isn't that right, Matt?
Yeah.
And so don't give away the brand names, but basically, you mistake if I'm mistake. Fucking hell! Sorry, guys, I'm having an aneurysm here. Correct me if I'm not mistaken, Matt. Yep. You found a UK site that was basically importing US sort of pre-workout supplements. So firstly, why did you want one? What got you interested in it? Did you hear about it on social media or something?
So I was looking for pre-workouts and I like to push the boundaries. This was when I was at the gym. And the UK ones are quite bland. They're your typical, they've got caffeine in them, some creatine, some L-theanine potentially, and a few other things, which are good for entry level. But if anyone that's ever taken pre-workouts, you build up a tolerance to that. Pretty quick. And they are good and they do help. But then once you've got a tolerance, you're like, I want more. And then if you go and have a look at American ones, you go on any forum for bodybuilding and you go, oh my God, the difference in ingredients between a US and a UK pre-workout is huge. So there are websites where they're importing US products and they have some ingredients in them that are banned in the UK. So the biggest one that I notice is your himbine. Okay. It's a big one. It is legal for dietary supplements in the US, but it is under review by the FDA, but it is still legal. In the UK, it is banned over the counter, and it is only for prescription for erectile dysfunction.
But you were like, I'm going to get my hands on some of this.
But it also is used for fat loss in America, but it also gets your heart going, essentially. Yeah. It gets that blood flowing. So that is one ingredient that you do notice a difference. Another one is DMHA, completely banned, again, over the counter in the UK, but in the US, it's fair game. So buying these, I tried it, and oh my God, I did not sleep. We gave it to someone else in the office, one of the sales team, and he had his best ever day on sales and helped tidy the warehouse. So they are strong.
If you know this member of the team is unheard of as well, especially the warehouse tidying bit. You're like, what the hell has got into him? So what attracted you to it? So you saw that there were ingredients that you legally couldn't purchase here in the UK and things you couldn't use, and you were like, to be honest with you, that's what I'm like. As soon as I'm like, you can't have that, I'm like, but I want it. I'm getting it. So what is it that made you say, right, I really want to try that? And you were just looking for something a bit stronger?
Yeah, I was looking for something stronger, and the studies about its danger were inconclusive. Like we said, the EU is pretty hot to ban things. People had heart attacks from himbine, which is why it's been banned. But sometimes you've got to look at the consumer taking them. People that take pre-workout, especially when I got into that culture, it's dry scooping it, double scooping it. How much can I take? There's no wonder when you're taking 3 or 4 times the recommended amount of caffeine that you're probably going to get a heart attack.
Yeah, no wonder you start having some heart palpitations and things like that. Yeah, I'm with you. And also as well, I do appreciate what you're saying. It's like anything. The first coffee, you really feel it. It really energises you. 2 years in, you could have one at 10 p.m. and be like, right, I'm off to bed. But I did the exact same as you years and years and years ago. I don't take pre-workouts anymore. I try and keep it as clean as possible. But years ago, I started taking them. Was like, wow, getting some really brilliant effects here. And then before I knew it, I was doing exactly what you're saying: double dry scooping it and getting going. So it is just a really interesting example of key differences of something that we can't get here versus how they'll have it in the States. And I think it's also the same for fat burners, any sort of testosterone booster, dick pill, anything at all like that. They get away with way higher dosages, a lot looser with the ingredients that they include.
Yeah, and I would say that one thing that's definitely noticeable in pre-workouts, fat burners, or any American supplements is the use of branded ingredients. So for those that don't know, a branded ingredient, you'll see it with the little trademark R in the corner. This is something that an ingredient company or a separate body has gone out, had some studies done, maybe altered it. Some of them have been altered, some of them haven't, but then they can make claims off the back of that. Now, to a lot of people, it sounds great. It's like, okay, I'm not taking caffeine, I'm taking a better version of caffeine. The most common one is called a NuCaf. It's extended, sustained release. So as we know, caffeine causes, sometimes a crash. So this lasts a bit longer. So that's in a lot of American products. Now, the reason we see that is because the way for the studies to work in the US to get approval is so easy. I could have a study, 5 people on it, they're all my friends, and we all get great results. Slap my trademark R, call it a fancy name, and you can go and put that in a product. In the UK and EU, it's much more difficult to get a branded ingredient approved. So it's mainly just for a marketing claim. If I go and look at a product and I've got one that just says caffeine and one that says extreme caffeine release, you're like, wow, I want that. Yeah. And then you've got a little graph that says 35% better. You're like, yeah, absolutely.
You're like, science.
Yeah. And exactly. It's a very different culture. It's much stricter in the EU. In America, there's so many more branded ingredients.
Yeah, it's interesting to say, and also the other trade-off of that as well is here in the UK and Europe are branded ingredients that are tried and tested and they are regulated, much more expensive. That's essentially what you're paying for. You're paying for the studies, you're paying for, well, you know what, you're paying to be able to say it on pack. That's kind of more what you're getting at there. And it's, we have sort of hard versus soft claims here. So let's say, you've got, a branded caffeine ingredient and you can legally make those claims. Maybe I've just got a more generic one. They ultimately will do the exact same thing, but I can't make those hard claims on pack. I can say, may lead to, likely to help increase. I can use a lot of sort of helps, influences, so-and-so can improve. Whereas you can say, right, scientifically backed, this will improve energy levels, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case. I think with anyone buying a supplement, and we this is a common theme throughout our podcast, is always check the studies, branded or not. But especially on some of the branded, if it's one you've never recognised, check the studies. Are they peer reviewed? That means, have they been checked? Has the study been checked by other people in the industry with no financial benefit? How many people are on these studies? Look at the results. Because some of these branded ingredients are fantastic. There are some modified ones that are world class. There are others that are just snake oil for the claims, like you just said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this one's a hard one to really quantify, and it'd be good maybe next time we'll put up some specific examples. But I feel like the rules in the USA they're a lot more open to interpretation. There's a lot more grey area, whereas here in the UK it's very much black and white. Like, yes, you can do that. No, you can't do that. Whereas in the USA, there seems to be a lot more flex, a lot more reading between the lines, a lot more it's sort of okay until it's not.
Yeah, I think that's part of just the entire philosophy of America, really. They're pushing boundaries. In every bit of business in America, they just push. And I think sometimes that can be great for the consumer. A lot of groundbreaking ingredients in the medical industry and supplements have been developed in the US because of this philosophy. But again, at the other end of the spectrum, it sometimes comes at a cost of being unhealthy when there's bad actors developing things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, to maybe put it in a more easily digestible form, if you'll pardon the pun, is for the people who don't understand and have such an in-depth knowledge of supplements, I think something that really highlights this is the difference in, regular food, snacks, drinks. The difference between the UK and the US is absolutely huge. So obviously, the USA are famous for, mega size, super gold, 20-ounce cups at every service station. They've got, you buy a pack of donuts here in the UK, maybe you get 4 or 5. And in the US, they're like, there's a child's portion right here. They'll do you a big tray of 20. And I think that it's kind of like a real reflection of the same way that the supplement industry is.
Yeah, and I think going back to products that are different from UK to US, I've seen a really, really interesting one is Doritos. This blew my mind when I saw this picture. So we'll have it on the screen, but for those that can't see, it's the US version of Doritos, the Cool Ranch flavour, has 3 different artificial colourings. Red 40, blue 1 and yellow 5. The UK one has 1 colour and it is not an artificial one. These are the same flavour product. The American list has got probably, I'd say, double the amount of ingredients and 3 artificial colourings in to make the same thing. It's because they can push the boundaries on that and chock full of it, and these things they're quite addictive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in the UK, we're really putting a big focus on natural food and limiting how much processed food we eat, whereas the American market is dominated by processed foods, high sugar, high colorants, all these additives added to them. And firstly, I think that's kind of the culture out there. I was in the US a few months ago, and I think when you go to any sort of gas station, any sort of store, man, it's a diabetic's dream. Like, it is floor to ceiling with millions of varieties of sweets. I like, if you go into like a Nando's or a Pizza Hut, they've got the self-service drinks things that you fill up. They got like 30 of those with all these different drinks and flavors you've never heard of. The minimum cup size is like a litre or something like that. And I think, again, it's just such a huge part of kind of who they are as a nation, where the UK it's really changed over the past decade. You'll see when you go into any sort of shop now, the impulse buy sections in major supermarkets, they're now full of healthy alternatives and nuts and sort of cereal bars and things like that, whereas they used to always just be full of proper sweets, proper chocolate, fizzy drinks. They are making it harder and as well taxing us a lot higher for sugar now in the UK as well.
Yeah, and I think that's reflected in the obesity rates. So the US obesity rates are at 42.8%.
Yeah.
UK, 28%.
I do feel like we've gone up a bit and maybe they've brought it down. But 48%, so to nearly half of the population
42%,
is 42%.
but yeah, still nearly
Well,
half.
still high enough. So 42% are obese.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Now, not necessarily what you just said, the way they've got the larger portion stuff, it's not necessarily worse, it's just got more freedom. Everyone knows America's big on freedom, and the UK, we tend to change the consumers to say, look, this is healthier, don't have bad. America's like, this is bad, this is good, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And it's obviously, we're seeing the obesity rates.
Land of the free and the brave, isn't it? Absolutely. They're like, get to do what they want. But one of the things I noticed when I was last out in the States, I loved it. I had a brilliant time. I absolutely loved it. But every portion of food you get is absolutely enormous, usually covered in cheese and butter. There was... And do you know what? When I left, if you'd have said there's going to be no vegetable on pretty much all of your meals, I'd have been like, no problem. Honestly, mate, about 7-8 days in, I was like, I need some vegetables. I need some fruit. Like, I never thought it'd be something that I actually had a real hankering for. But there's only so many days you can have like bacon, French toast, and a stack of pancakes and start and still feel good. Like, it makes you feel so lethargic. And I was definitely there within day 2. Like, I see why they have a weight problem in this country.
Yeah, it's certainly eye-opening when you first go to America and see it. Because if you go to a different country like Italy, the difference in food there is huge. And I think it's again a culture thing. With Italians, if you dare buy store-bought pasta, you will get the dirtiest looks.
Oh, hey!
Yeah, they will
Is
not
it
be
insulting
happy.
them?
In the Americans, they're not that fussed. And another reason is in the UK we have a sugar tax. I think it was a few years ago, and I was actually really upset about this because they ruined my favourite Sprite from the taps in Subway. But we got rid of all that. It's all sugar-free. In America...
it's all Fanta Zero, Coke Zero, and also as well, that was another one I wanted to touch on is Fanta's like a really good example. So in the UK, it's a very light, very sort of, it's a very light yellow. Whereas you go to most other countries, anything on the continent of Africa, but USA in particular, that Fanta is like a dark orange. You're like, this has got like a lot of extra stuff in it that we don't have.
Yes, because of the sugar tax and also because of additives. Certain additives have restrictions on the amount you can have in them. I'll have to pull it up on the screen, but there is a maximum amount across a number of numbers. Colourings in America, that restriction's far higher.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it doesn't even exist. So the Americans are free to put more colourings into their products.
Whereas we're much more limited on it. And there's a whole, it's interesting that you said there's the sort of pre-workout brand, and they were adding a lot of bits in that we couldn't get over here. There are a lot of foodstuffs we can't get over here. So when I was over there, like proper Mountain Dew, proper Twinkies, and then one of my all-time favourite drinks that was absolutely decimated, Sunny D. Do you have Sunny D when you were a kid? I loved Sunny D when I was a kid. And like, it was the early 90s. Like, we were like, it's healthy. It's basically orange juice. And then, do you remember the story? I think it was 1999. There was a little girl in England, and she literally got turned orange because she'd been drinking so much. I think the story goes, she was only about 4 years old, but she was drinking 1.5 litres a day. So I hope her parents were in prison because that's just terrible parenting first and foremost. But I think that's when they culled it. That's when they stopped allowing Sunny D to be sold in the UK. Went off the market for like 10 years, came back, and it was just not the same product. But I think it only had something ridiculously minimal, like 5% real fruit juice in it. And they sold it as like, it's basically orange juice for kids. And I think that's, again, it's just a really good example of the difference in these products. And, it's really easy for us to sit here and sort of say, they put all these additives in, they put all this crap in. But I did a little bit of thinking about this, and this is purely my own thinking, my opinion on it. But the UK population, we're at about 68 million people. The USA is 335 million people. I also think so. I think firstly, they've got to work out how to feed those many people, and I think when they're producing these foodstuffs, I think it takes longer for it to be shipped to the stores it's going to be sold. It probably sits on the shelves for longer because they've got so many products. Like you've been to a US supermarket; they're absolutely enormous. So I think they're generally filling them with these additives to firstly preserve the food for longer and make sure it gets where it needs to get going. And then secondly, I think because everything is so to the max, so full of flavouring, so full of additives.
They relate colour to taste.
Yeah.
The brighter this is, the better it's going to taste.
Yeah, and I'm sure brands like Doritos are like, we'd love to make a Doritos without all these crazy additives, without all this like mind-melting stuff. But the problem is we just wouldn't be competitive if that's what we were doing. So we have to match what the competition are doing.
Yeah, and I think one thing that really drove the end of artificial colourings in the UK was the infamous Blue Smartie.
Yes.
Now, if you remember this, it was in 2006, Nestle got rid of the Blue Smartie. Now, the actual reason they did this was they moved to natural flavourings and could not find a natural blue flavour to put in. Blue isn't actually something that's natural. It's not really a natural colour out in the wild. So they actually get it from an algae called spirulina. It grows in ponds, which is hard to source on that scale. So they took time to do it, so they just removed the Blue Smartie. But off the back of that, people picked up and went, no, it's the Blue Smartie that's causing problems for children. So there was a study in 2007 that looked into this, and the end result was it can cause hyperactivity in children. A lot of people, I don't know if you ever had this, my parents were big on, can't have E-numbers, Blue Smartie, oh my God, you are not touching that thing. And the study come out, I'm not a big believer in this study personally because they did the study on a number of colourings and a preservative, gave them all to children in one drink, and obviously they had a placebo one as well. At the end of it, they come out saying, yes, these children were more hyperactive with these colourings and preservative. They didn't say which one. They just said a group of colourings and a preservative together made kids hyperactive. And then the UK culture off the back of that, colouring's bad.
Ban it. They might get rid of it.
Yeah.
So you said your parents were really careful with him when you have it. You're an only child?
Yeah, kind of.
Kind of an only child. Okay, we'll save that one for another day. Don't worry. So I'm kind of one of 6. So when we were kids growing up, they were like, they couldn't have cared less. They were like, there's the door. Feel free to get out, you feral little monsters. They did very little to try and control us. They were like, just get the hell out of here. Like proper latchkey kids. But I think with all these additives and then with all these additional bits, it's no surprise, and we've mentioned it on the podcast before, anytime you're in America and you're just watching any TV, there is always a commercial that comes up for whatever pharmaceutical, whatever sort of supplement that comes up, and it's always a nice picture of a family or an old couple walking through a field and the sunlight's there and say, oh, gave me my life back, gave me my freedom back, may cause anal bleeding, may cause suicidal thoughts, do not contact your doctor, may make you kill your kids, and you're always like, why the hell does anyone take this? But again, that's their culture, that's what they're used to. They're used to pretty much ingesting whatever they want and not being too concerned about it.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Ultimately, that's why I think there is such a high use of all these additives and colourings, because the food's got to last longer, it's got to get further. And again, America is just so blasted with information, advertisements, colour, flavours. They just want everything to maximise on their senses. So I think really these brands have to do that to be competitive.
Yeah, and I just think when it comes down to what we can help consumers on, it goes back to just doing your education, becoming aware of what you're eating and aware of if you're craving that sugary thing, why is it? Because then you can learn to detox from it. But it's the American products, they are addictive, and you've got to be careful with them. Because tends to be, if they're addictive, it's probably because they're chock full of awful things.
Yeah, there's something that's hooking you.
So do your research on them. And sometimes you might do your research and go, you know what, I'm not actually that fussed. So that's fine. But I really think people need to just take care in what you're eating and look into it further.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the sort of educational points that we would advise to people that they can take away from this? I guess, it's about, do you think that just because we're more regulated that the UK standard is better than the US? Would you say that? Or do you think it's just, two sides of the same coin?
Yeah, I think it's just two different ways to look at politics in general. We restrict and say, no, this is bad. The Americans say, do as you please. You have all the right in the world to do something bad for you. And that's it. And I think you're seeing by the obesity rates differences, I don't think that's a really good approach. People can't be trusted. If you're manipulating them with addictive ingredients, it's not fair on people, really.
No,
but it is just down to education, really.
And ultimately, we think people really, anything, I think it's pretty clear. Even if you are in the States or when you're here in the UK, it's pretty clear when you pick something up how natural it is or how much colorant it's going to have in it. And generally, those are the things that we all know in our hearts that we should be trying to avoid. But we all want to treat every once in a while, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think taking a tip out of the Italians book, you can still make good food without all the additives and colourings. Yeah. It is harder.
Well, do you know what? I think that's what tastes the best. I think we've spoken about it before. The more farm to table we can get, the more natural, the less that someone can interfere with my food, the better. Is my personal opinion. Yeah. I loved being out in the States and really embraced the culture, but after a week, mate, you just feel sick. And I remember I was having like 2 Twinkies for breakfast every day, washing it down with like proper like old school full fat Coke as well. And I remember like after like 3 days, I just felt sort of lethargic, depressed. It was really bad. And I think another really interesting one that our wonderful Mr. Producer Miles George we were talking about ahead of the time is it's the flavour of Doritos. We don't have it. What do you call it? It's Cool Ranch.
Yeah,
it's Cool Ranch. Because I always hear Americans talking about it on sitcoms and stand up. And I heard a comedian talking about it. He was saying it was like licking a battery, but like all of his pleasure sensors were going off, and his body didn't know whether to run away or to come from it. And we were talking that they did like a taste experiment where they hooked people up essentially to equipment that was like monitoring their brains, and they're trying to get these reactions out of them because they know these products need to be as competitive and as grabbing as possible. So they're literally trying to cheat the game and work out what is the best chemical combination we can legally give someone that will give them the biggest reaction, that will give them the biggest hit of dopamine and biggest release, and will ultimately get return sales, become a lifelong customer. And I think, again, a very different way on how products are developed versus here in the UK. We kind of want it to be calm and nice, and isn't that enjoyable? Whereas America's like, just want it all on top. And it's just, you really get that vibe when you're out there.
Yeah, I don't think that product would sell that well in the UK, just because, again, the culture of us, those colourings that are in it, it's not going to float very well. But you are right. I have had the US Doritos, and I was like, I've just had a whole bag. What's going on? Yeah. Like they are a different level. And this is where you said when you went to America and you had all that food and it felt awful. For people that have lived in that, that's their baseline.
It's the same thing. It's like alcoholics and drug addicts. They don't know how bad they feel every day because that's baseline. Yeah. So if they cleaned it up for a week, they'd be like, oh my God, I felt terrible. Whereas you're right, it's the same for the US market. They don't realise that they're vastly overweight and just kind of slowly poisoning themselves.
Yeah, so it's something
they don't know they feel bad. They don't feel great. Yeah,
it's a detox that's required for people that live on that diet, and it's going to be hard. So I say this to anyone I tried cutting in the gym, and you've got to build healthy habits to do that. If you're changing your diet from awfully unhealthy food to suddenly farm to table incredibly healthy, it's going to be difficult, and you've just got to plough through it and keep trying it and find combinations that you enjoy. I have had salads that are better than chocolate cake. Yeah. Not many. No, I've had many a dry salad.
Yeah, I've had some good ones with some halloumi and treats and stuff. Like, it can be done, but you're right. People always sort of ask me about fitness or diet advice. I'm like, the best diet's one you can stick to. And the best exercise routine is one you can stick to. Don't have nothing but dry salad and hit the gym every single day for 1 week and then you're like, I'm traumatized, I never want to go back. It's about finding that good balance, enjoying those nice bits. I work out like a motherfucker so that on the weekend I can have beer and a whiskey and I can have myself a big slice of chocolate cake and pizza. It's the best of both worlds. And then one big cultural difference that you mentioned yesterday that really resonated with me, and we're sort of heading out now, so I just want to make sure we got it in, is the effects of World War II and rationing. For a good amount of time here in the UK, people had their ration books, they had really minimal foodstuffs that they'd get their hands on. So I think that did develop a culture in our grandparents of less is more and learning to do without, whereas America didn't really have to go through that, and they've just always been, it is a culture of more and excess and supersize me and everything like that. So I think that's something that's really sort of caused these big differences in our culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think ultimately, it's the same as always. Do your research, really consider what you're looking at. Try and have some fun with it. Don't ruin your life. And and I think ultimately we all know if anything's overly carbonated, full of colour, it doesn't look like anything natural that you might find on where on the world, it's probably not going to be the best thing for you to ingest. Right, Matt?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Guys, it's been the Fig Factor Weekly. It's been fantastic to have you. Matt, thank you so much for coming in and for being a part of it. You're becoming a regular fixture here, which we love. I'm Harry Macy. Guys, we'll catch you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.
The Fig Factor, there's no one like us. The only podcast you can truly trust.